Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. In collaboration with our corporate partner, CYFIRMA, ASB will be organizing a series of webinars to share insights. We'll now hand over the time to CYFIRMA researcher to kickstart this session.
Okay, hi everyone. Let me quickly share my screen with you. And all right, are you able to see it now?
Hi, researcher, can you full screen? Yeah.
Does it work now?
Yes, can see, but I need you to full screen.
Yeah. All right, all good
Thank you.
now?
Yep, it's good.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the introduction, and let's start. Today we will be talking about China-Taiwan relations. It's heating up and relevant engagement on their cyber front. All right, here. Sorry about it. And so introductions, who am I? My name is Tomáš Meravi. I work at CYFIRMA as cyber threat intelligence lead. I've been working in IT and cybersecurity for over 10 years, with 6 years of experience in incident response teams, 2 years in dedicated threat hunting, and now over 2 years doing cyber threat intelligence. I'm originally from Central Europe, but I have been working in Singapore for past 7 years. And just a bit of a disclaimer, I suffer from addiction to context, which is very good for analysis work, but not very good for presenting. So my slides are a bit verbose, so I can stick to the script and not going on tangent and spending entire webinar on first 2 slides. Okay. So agenda for today, we have few disclaimers. We will then go to relevant geopolitics, rise of the Chinese APT, some tactics and connections there, recognizing signs of APT activity, relevant risks and impact, building resilience, and then of course, time for questions and answers. So for the disclaimers, as we all know, politics are touchy and polarizing topics. So CYFIRMA in our intelligence work and this webinar are trying to take factual approach to the matter. And geopolitics itself matter a lot in cybersecurity. They often dictate the objectives and therefore TTPs of the nation state APTs, and even influence local cybercrime. There are no saints in geopolitical struggles. Anyone, east, west, north, south, no matter where they are from, they are all using underhanded tactics, and that goes for both cyberspace and the real world. Important one here, I will be using CCP and China kind of indistinguishably or interchangeably, but it does not equal Chinese people. From friendship experiences, I know there are many people from mainland China who don't necessarily agree with what the government is doing. My personal bias in intelligence work, it's always important to know personal biases. So I'm coming from a post-Soviet republic with some distant relatives in Ukraine, and that certainly influences my personal views on current events. But I'm trying to remain objective and stick to the facts, because I know that's the only way how to understand what is going on objectively and find the truth. And the last one, for the due to time restrictions and complexity of the topics, this is kind of high-level overview, but I have included links at the bottom of respective slides for fully detailed reports to find all the connections, details that I will be glossing over. And as we all know, intelligence work is in the intelligence work, the devil is always in the details. So feel free to read those, visit those if you are interested. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into the relevant geopolitics there. So part one that relates to Xi Jinping itself. So as we all know, he has managed to gain unprecedented level of controls within the CCP and Chinese government, centralizing a lot of power in his own hands. And this kind of power grab wasn't seen ever since the era of Mao Zedong. And he's wielding that power quite obnoxiously, if I may say so, and using it to enforce a very early communist ideology and also building cult of personality. There are some books that he has written on, the communist ideology and that sort of thing. And children in school are mandated to learn these, recite them, memorize them, and that sort of thing. So that's usually a sign of authoritarian cult of personality thing. Under his leadership, China has gradually been abandoning the policy of peaceful rise championed by the previous generations of the communist leadership. And we are seeing escalating and kind of dramatic shift from pragmatic economic building policies to more ideology-driven nationalistic objectives. And once again, looking at history, this has never ended well. So fingers crossed, reason will prevail there. And according to available intelligence, Xi is being increasingly isolated from truthful information because he's ruling through fear, which is in turn creating a bubble where nobody really wants to give any sort of negative report or critical feedback due to history of severe punishments, including executions. And as we have seen in Russia and Ukraine, such distorted perception of an understanding of reality was the exact same reason that Vladimir Putin has assumed he can just waltz into Ukraine and be welcomed as a liberator and gain Ukraine pretty much without a fight. So those are the concerns coming from Xi Jinping itself. Moving on to part 2, Taiwan. And Taiwan has been leading example, or Taiwan issue has been leading example of the shift from economy to ideology-driven political agenda. And Taiwan has put itself in a very good place. They played their card very smart with developing the cutting-edge semiconductor and electronic industry, which now the entire world is depending on. And China, and if we are really honest, the entire world is struggling to develop the same capabilities for cutting-edge semiconductor chips. If you look at Intel, which is a company that pretty much give birth to this whole industry, they've been stuck on 40 nanometer technology for years. They were able to move to 10 nanometers, but TSMC, the biggest Taiwanese semiconductor company, is working on 5 nanometers and preparing to roll out 3 and 2 nanometer technology. So they are really the only place in the world that's able to do these cutting-edge chips, with South Korea a little bit and Samsung, but they have very limited capacities, compared to what's available on Taiwan. So since China is struggling with this, and the chips are essential for multiple levels of economy, military, and so on, it would be kind of natural choice or obvious choice that they would like to collaborate with Taiwanese industries. However, the blooming democracy in Taiwan is a huge thorn in the side of CCP. It is undermining the ideology and the whole the ideology of communism, let's say, and increasingly restrictive authoritarian regime. With the reporting that leaks outside from China through the Great Firewall of China are anything to go with, the Chinese people in the mainland China are starting to more and more often question the trade-off between their freedom and rights, which are being more and more restricted for the quickly disappearing prosperity due to the COVID-0 policy restrictions, the real estate bubble bursting, a lot of unemployment for young people with high education, and of course the trade war between China and USA, which is also contributing to that unemployment. But in fairness to China and CCP, they are being strangled by the first island chain, which is the chain of islands going all the way from Japan to Southeast Asia through Taiwan, Philippines, and so on. So it's blocking their ambitions, and it's a fair game. Any government, any nation that would be in the same position would be trying to solve this problem and break out from this island chain. So it's completely understandable that they are trying to do this. And Taiwan seems to be the main point through which they are trying to resolve this problem. To some cybersecurity overlap, according to latest reports and telemetry, our own and also third-party reports, Taiwan has seen 4 times more phishing attempts and 15 times more plug X detections, which is the notorious CCP or Chinese APT's espionage malware. in April 2023. So the attempts in or the operations in Taiwan are escalating. And more notably, I think we are seeing shifting from targeting the industrial espionage to trying to get like economically motivated intellectual properties to boost economy, more towards military reconnaissance objectives, and also focusing on industries related directly to military as well. So moving on to part 3, the China, Taiwan, and USA, and allied countries or respective allied countries are finding themselves in a deadlock over Taiwan. So the crushing protests in Hong Kong and not adhering to the promise of one China, two systems have de facto destroyed any chance of peaceful reunification of mainland China with Taiwan. Taiwanese people have been enjoying the democracy and also their own economic prosperity. And once they saw what has happened to Hong Kong, they don't really see or they are not really willingly to go through the same, authoritarian crushing of their freedoms willingly. So, but at the other side of the fence, Xi Jinping appears to see the reunification of mainland China with Taiwan as a pinnacle of his intended legacy, and he seems to be willing to use force if necessary to do so. And on the other side of the fence is the rest of the world, and especially the USA, who needs the cutting-edge chips to sustain itself at multiple levels. As I mentioned, the cutting-edge chips, they are in everything, the consumer goods to drive the economy, keep the economy going, keep the jobs going, and so on. But also research and development, academia, and of course military is using these cutting-edge chips to get the upper hand in the arms race. So if the factories in Taiwan, and now I mean all the electronics and TSMC, the semiconductor chips fabs, were to stop production, the world economy would take a severe hit. We have seen this with the start of the pandemic, when there was chip shortage. That was quite a bit of a problem, but the factories were still running. There was just not enough capacity to satisfy the demand, which is still kind of ongoing problem. So if they were stopped, it would be even worse. And even worse, if they were destroyed due to a hot war or something like that, it would set back, our as humanity's technological progress decades back. We would have to rebuild these capabilities and capacities to, continue doing research development, which we would lose while we were rebuilding. And the 4th point here, the supply chain, the entire world is pretty much dependent on Chinese supply chain, and not just the labor. Also within the China is quite complex and robust supply chain of resources like rare earths and minerals that are used to create all the electronics and its components. And the other way around, China is also dependent on the world to demand this from China so they can satisfy it and sell it out and export it and make profit and boost their own economy. So hot war would translate into unprecedented global economic collapse and humanitarian crisis with it. And I'm mentioning this, I don't want to fearmonger, but I'm mentioning this that up until recently, this was considered enough of a deterrent for any kind of escalation between China and the rest of the world and their respective allies. However, at the last G7 summit, and even before, the moves were being made and discussed to move these supply chains from China to countries like Vietnam, India, and so on. And similarly, China is trying to limit the dependence on being export country to potentially hostile countries, and forging alliances with Russia, Iran, some Central Asian countries as well, and also expanding in Africa. So this deterrent is still heavily present, but it seems like everyone is trying to prepare for the worst, and that can in turn trigger some sort of vicious cycle, which hopefully, once again, the reason will prevail and we will be all good. So how does this all translate to cyberspace and activities of Chinese APTs? So during the Chinese economic miracle over the last few decades, their cyberspace operations and the relevant APTs activities, they gain notoriety for blatant industrial espionage and IP theft, but also for very clever TTPs. I'll talk about those a little bit later. And they were so successful that it eventually contributed heavily to and resulted to today's trade war between China and the USA, which is in turn causing a lot of the problems of today. However, with this shift from mostly economy-driven cyberspace objective to ideology and politics, we are seeing significant increase in targeting governments, non-government organizations like think tanks and political victims in bordering countries. The campaigns and the TTPs of Chinese APTs are increasingly seen on the bordering countries like India, which it wasn't the case before that, like a decade ago, because there was not to shame India or anything, but the primary targets were the Western countries to try to steal intellectual properties, the technology, and so on. So now India is becoming politically, strategically interesting, and therefore the Chinese APTs are having growing presence in there. And all while the industrial espionage as a whole is kind of stagnating at best, and it's shifting towards the military-related industries and to, once again, military reconnaissance kind of espionage, rather than aiming to steal technology, research, development, and IP that could be used for driving economy. There is also an overlap of TTPs previously used in industrial espionage and now seen in the political espionage, which implies some sort of redirection of resources that are available for this. And as an evidence, we can take a look at the most recent Barracuda email secure gateway exploitation, where, according to all telemetries and reports, nearly nearly a third of all victims were political targets with heavy presence in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and ASEAN countries. And why this is interesting is because this kind of exploit is very, very valuable. And anyone who has their hands on it, they are going to think very carefully where to use it, because they don't want to risk exposing of this exploit, so they can use it stealthily and maintain access for a very long time. So seeing such a big portion of all victims being political targets and in these countries means they are quite high priority for their objectives. So moving on from politics and going to the rise of Chinese APTs. For that, I have picked to illustrate how many other APTs have came to be. I picked APT 41 for one that I have made a comprehensive report on their history, but also they are behind developing PlugX, which is the most notorious malware used for espionage as well. And yeah, they are just the best example to go with. So they went from student club at university to nation state that we know as APT 41. In 1994, hobby hacker Tan Dalin, aka Rose, started network crack program hacker group at the Chengdu University. And there they were discovered by the People's Liberation Army of China, PLA, and they were signed up for a competition by Chengdu Military Command network attack defense competition, and they have won with quite significant margin. So in turn, they later received intensive 30-day training and went on a winning streak in national competition between provinces in China. And in turn, they netted 20,000 RMB in prize money. And also they gained reportedly an undisclosed sponsor, which is assumed to be the PLA and Sichuan province branch, and which was paying the group 2,000 RMB a month and 5,000 RMB for completing targeted attacks, which was quite a lot of money in early 2000s China. Part two, the group later started a company called CNASM, through which they have been selling the hacking tools they have been developing, and this also includes contracting to PLA itself. In 2006, the group gained international media attention through a series of zero-day exploits and Microsoft Office attacks against Japan, USA, and UK. And what stood out there was the DLL injection technique, its early stages, and that's the technique that has been carried over up to this day. And Chinese APTs and APT-41 specifically have been polishing this DLL injection technique over the years, and they are absolute masters of it. And so these attacks in 2006 was part of large series of attacks, which was named by the US government as Titan Rain. And these attacks were carried out by multiple Chinese threat actors. But then again, this group of NCPHA, known as AP41 today, stood out among the rest thanks to their sophisticated and advanced and very efficient TTPs. So how do we know all this? They openly talked about this on their blog, which you can see here. Is the screenshot from Wayback Machine. This is their blog, yeah. And here you can see the screenshot of the shop of the CNA-ASM where they were selling their tools or offering their tools. And they also, in 2007, Times Magazine somehow managed to interview the group where they pretty much confessed to all the above that I have mentioned. Moving on to, and according to available intelligence and reporting, the contracting like this, finding the talent at the university, giving them some sort of training and helping them establish private companies that will develop tools and carry out some of the objectives is very common practice in the Chinese cyberspace operations. And it's very similar to what US or Western three-letter agencies are doing as well. There are a lot of contracting going on too. So part 3, APT41 members were also linked to Chengdu 404 racketeering conspiracy, which was a very long-going hacking and blackmailing, of over 100 victims in East and Southeast Asia. And this was for personal gain, which is something that is not very tolerated by the Chinese government, and especially not by the contractors of PLA. But letting them do this just shows how good relationship and what kind of importance this group had for the military and the government at the time. So they let this slide. And so these attacks used tool named Vinti. And based on that, the nexus of this activity was tracked under Vinti group. And there was a lot of overlapping TTPs with APT41, which was very confusing at the time for researchers to figure out what was actually going on. So moving on, as I described, this is going for very long, it's a decade-long hacking spree. And interestingly, it primarily targeted gaming and gambling companies in East and Southeast Asia, which is a trend that's going on until to this day, especially in Southeast Asia. The victimology in recent reports and telemetry we are seeing, especially in the latest report for APT27, shows a significant share of gaming and gambling companies in Southeast Asia region. And this is also something that has been underestimated, I think, for a while, that video games can present significant attack vector. Genshin Impact, some of you may know, is one of the most popular games at the entire world nowadays. And its anti-cheat system, which has kernel-level access, was quite recently exploited through one of their drivers and pretty much gave the attackers kernel access. So moving on to evolution of tools, and this is the second reason why I brought up the APT41. They've been behind the notorious PlugX malware and also its successor ShadowPad, which we'll discuss later. And this tool has started with the Jinwei or NCPH remote control tool that you can see here on the screenshot in the down right corner. And it also has the signature of authors, VHG, which is one of the developers in the group, and Rose, the founder of the group here. So this tool was heavily used during the Titan Rain campaign and attacks. And it's known for its early DLL injection that I have mentioned has been polished and developed until to this day and made it so successful. But the group was also developing many other tools that were gradually integrated into later iterations of the GNUI and CPH tool. If you go up here, you can see there's version 3, version 5, 6.0.1, and so on. So the tool was quite heavily developed over, quite short period of time, as you can see here as well. And this integration of these modules into the tool ultimately resulted in the famous modular design of the plug X itself. So tactics and connections, I'll stick to the plug X to kind of illustrate how these connections are made and to attribute things to Chinese APDs. The plug X has been available for sale to pretty much anyone within China who asked for it, either government units or military units, but also private groups that were carrying out some hacking objectives as well. And it was so for a very long time, at least since its inception around 2006, 2007. So it is quite difficult this day to attribute the plug X attacks to specific group because so many of them are using it. So there are some other TTPs and indicators that you have to look for if you are trying to make the attribution there. But also at the same time, due to its clever design and stealth, it has been tool of choice for espionage and by many of the government-linked groups. You can see them all mentioned here. APT1 is probably the most notorious one. It's known to be associated with the Unit 61398, which is the PLA second bureau and their espionage operations. And then APT 10, 19, 24, 27, and group known as Dragon OK, all known to use plug X and known to be carrying out espionage campaigns on behalf of the Chinese government. Moving on to ShadowPad, which unlike the plug X which is still heavily used by many groups, ShadowPad appears to be designed for specific and limited users only, specifically for the PLA-SSF, which stands for the People's Liberation Army of China Special Support Force, which includes the cyber operations. ShadowPad is using an encrypted ID system to control the access. So even if the researchers were able to get their hands on the binaries of the ShadowPad framework, they are not able to use it because of this system, which limits our capabilities to research it. But it's ingenious if it was designed to be contracted for the government or military. And what's interesting as well is very unified framework, which is streamlined workflows, which is very invaluable when training new officers for cyber operations. Similar to common military practices, everyone is being issued the same uniform, same rifle, same handgun, same knife, and that sort of thing, the same gear. So they are able to all train at once and become operational as soon as possible. So we are seeing the similar kind of thing with the ShadowPad. Going forward, the APT-41 members, through the observed hacking during the Chengdu 404 conspiracy, are known for their love for the Japanese media and games and hacking them as well for decades now. So why I'm mentioning this, it's linking kind of the first occurrence of ShadowPad to Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, which suggests the initial customers of ShadowPad, where they were able to utilize the knowledge of the local cyberspace through the decades of hacking in it by the PLA-SSF units Team Tonto and TIC. And therefore, we are assuming that the major or main contractor for the ShadowPad and APT-41 is the Eastern Theater Command of the military, which is focusing on Taiwan Strait, Korea, Japan as well. So other groups known for using ShadowPad are APT-23, Wet Panda, Dagger Panda, which is associated with or linked to the unit 69010, one of the PLA units, and Aquatic Panda, also known as Earthluska. And all these are focusing almost exclusively also on the Eastern theater command of sphere of influence as well. So that's another indicator. Although I have to mention that they have been, the shadow pad rather has been observed in other countries like Mongolia as well. So how do you recognize Chinese APT activity, or even generally speaking, APT nation state APT activity in your network? So for the Chinese ones, the TTPs and tools, obviously, if you detect plug X or shadow pad in your environment, which are pretty much exclusive to Chinese APTs, that's quite a clear sign of their presence. But also other custom-built malwares and tools, which Chinese APT groups are notorious for. And due to the nature of espionage, where you want to stay hidden as long as possible and maintain the presence there without being discovered, custom-made sort of, if you will, zero-day software and malware and tools are essential for that. Using any kind of commodity malware like Cobalt Strike, Mimikatz, and those kind of tools are so well known and easily detectable that they don't really work for that kind of objectives. So some other tools that have been recently used by Chinese APTs are ZX Shell, sys update by APT27, Merdor, and tiny node backdoors. One of the other techniques is spear phishing. This is not unique to Chinese APTs, but Chinese APTs are known to have a tailored approach and targeting selected, well-researched individuals that they have identified as potentials, as being potentially able to exploit to gain access to the target organization. So they are preferring quality over quantity, and they also heavily utilize grooming. They engage, they well research their targets, they engage with them, they build some sort of rapport and trust over long periods of time, and groom them to eventually exploit the trust relationship to gain the access to the network. Quite similarly, but the same is the watering hole attacks. It's not exploiting the relationship between threat actor and the victim, but trust relationship between source or a website and the targeted victim. So they infect these trusted sources, you know, some repositories of software, even community forums, that sort of thing, and they inject it with malware and exploits and gain unauthorized access to the victim systems through there. And finally, one growing problem for everyone really is the supply chain compromises. It's gaining popularity. Russians kind of started this, or Russian nation state APTs rather have kind of started this, and Chinese APTs now adopt the same approach. So they are trying to eject malicious code into legitimate software of vendor companies, or poison updates, or exploit vulnerabilities, or even create the vulnerabilities in the software through GitHub and that sort of thing. We have already seen that too. And of course, that allows them to cast quite widespread net and catch the intended targets, but also a lot of bystanders are getting caught in the crossfires as well. So that's why this is such a big problem. Some other indicators might be, which is kind of tricky if we are speaking strictly to Singapore or Taiwan, that the time zones and working hours might be an indicator. From my previous experience, I worked for one of the big pharma companies, and we have seen, we have detected plug X, and the related activity quite clearly correlated to Beijing time zone, because they are regular employees, if you will. It's military or government, but still they have their own working hours, and they seems to be adhering to those, just work throughout the day during the common working hours. Another one, still tricky for, you know, Singapore, Taiwan, and other countries with a lot of Chinese people of Chinese descent using Chinese language, are the Chinese language elements in the malware itself, the command and control infrastructure, or social engineering techniques. And somewhat related to this is also a strong understanding of the targeted regions, languages, cultures, geopolitical issues, sort of thing. But since they don't have enough personnel who has been living in the region to carry out all these operations, they are using people who are still in mainland China and might not have been even outside of mainland China. And they are trying to teach them about these things. But when they engage, one of the indicators can be somewhat obvious, a sort of fake or textbook knowledge and naivety about the culture when they try to have a discussion or engage the victim. Third one are the long game TTPs, the tactic, techniques, procedures, and in another word, slow TTPs to fly under the radar. For example, for exfiltration, they might want to use DNS tunneling technique, and they will use very slow and low frequency packets sending, so they don't trigger any sort of volumetric monitoring or alerting, which is quite an exact opposite of ransomware, which is relying on speed to beat the detection. Ransomware attacks usually, they try to obviously avoid detection, but they also they know that they will be detected eventually, so they try to be as fast as possible to reach their objective, ransom the network before the detection and mitigation can do anything about it. Whereas the espionage obviously wants to stay there for a very, very long time. So the TTPs are related to that as well. You have to look for persistence mechanisms to stay, for creating backdoors, schedule tasks, modify system services in order to maintain access long after the initial compromise. Similarly, the persistent access, they employ advanced techniques to evade detection, employ anti-forensics measures, and use encrypted C2 communications, and very, very frequently update their malware and infrastructure to make sure that they are not being caught. And also the data exfiltration, they used advanced cover channels, DNS tunneling is being one of them, but steganography as well, and also exploiting legitimate services to bypass the detection. So the data loss prevention policy for services, if you are using any kind of cloud services for sharing documents or storing documents within your organization, they should be heavily monitored to make sure that nothing that's too sensitive, too confidential is being shared or transferred through these legitimate services. Or if it is, at least it is, and it requires approval and that sort of thing. So what are some risks and impact of APT activities? They are quite obvious. So economic espionage, this is different from industrial espionage. They are targeting industries for financial and strategic advantage. For example, some Chinese company or corporation or nation-owned corporation might want to get this kind of information to gain leverage in negotiating deals and that sort of thing. Obviously, a very big problem that triggered the trade war was stealing of the intellectual properties, trade secrets, which affects competitiveness, innovation, reputation and trust damage. If any kind of personally identifiable informations are being leaked, or NDA contracts and that sort of things, it will erode the trust of customers, investors, business partners, and all these relationships, their confidences, and can cause a lot of problems. Supply chain compromises, exploiting the vulnerabilities in vendors and suppliers. And you can be either, if you are a vendor yourself, developing some kind of software that you are reselling or providing service with, you might be targeted in that regard, but also on the other hand, you might be caught in the widely casted net that supply chain attacks are doing. Then, depending on the nature of business or operations or your organization is involved in, geopolitical influence, if you are non-government organization, think tank, or work with politicians, that sort of thing, that might be an objective and problem for you when it comes to nation state APTs, and you will have to pay attention to relevant countries that might be interested. And lastly, if you are government contractor or military contractor, breaching your network might present a national security threat. So how do you build resilience against all this stuff? First, I think I would mention the high quality threat intelligence is kind of crucial at this day and age, to just move beyond, antiviruses, EDR and whatnot. Everyone or many companies are building robust monitoring and alerting systems, but they have to be fed with accurate and timely intelligence like TTPs and IOCs, so they know what they need to look for. And especially since the Chinese APTs are relying on their own custom malware, and they are very quickly and periodically updating it to stay under the radar. Threat intelligence can help a lot to update your monitoring with the most relevant IOCs. Also, the APT objectives are closely aligned with the strategic and political interests of the government, in this case, CCP. So maintaining situational awareness regarding the relevant geopolitics is quite essential to understand the risk probability. And not necessarily everyone who's in charge on cybersecurity program has enough time, mental bandwidth, if you will, to pay attention to all this stuff. So threat intelligence contractor or vendor or a platform will be able to provide digest and timely early warnings, if you will, to understand the risk probability for your own organization. On somewhat similar note, the growing adoption of supply chain watering hole attacks is adding exponential more complexity to calculating the risk. Now you don't have to worry only about your own organization, but pretty much every organization you are working with, our business partner with, and also their own contractors as well, which is frankly too much to handle for any person. So intelligence platforms like our own are able to help with this through assets monitoring. You can put your assets in there and connect it through the contractors, software vendors and whatnot, and the platform is able to see if any of the connected business partners software you are using from third parties whatnot has been under the threat or compromised and that sort of thing. And based on all the above, I kind of mentioned it already, the high quality threat intelligence platform is able to provide early warnings to organization. It's not necessarily warning that someone is about to hack your organization, but it's to understand the risk probability and make sure that you are aware of the possibilities that has been happening lately based on the latest development. Moving on to specifically supply chain attacks resilience, and this is area where the organization's supply chain manager or team that is managing the supply chain has to collaborate with the cybersecurity, either consultants or contractors or own internal cybersecurity team. So assess and monitor suppliers for their own cybersecurity practices, establish contractual agreements with the specific cybersecurity requirements, diversify your supply chain to reduce reliance on single source, aka do not put all your eggs into one basket. Conduct security assessment and audits of your suppliers. Secure software and firmware updates from trusted sources, implement least privilege access for your suppliers. You don't want to give them admin access rights if you don't have to. And if you have to, strong contracts have to be in place. Monitoring and detecting anomalies within the supply chain. Establish incident response collaboration with the suppliers as well. So make sure that if you have already an incident response plan or you are creating one or updating one, include your suppliers in it. Make sure that you have contacts to people who can help you with in the suppliers organizations and so on. Stay informed and share intelligence with industry peers. That's crucial for collective security and well-being. And regularly test and evaluate the supply chain resilience. For watering hole attacks, I would say educating employees about the risks of watering hole attacks and how to identify suspicious websites. From my long experience in many companies, They do quite basic education of cybersecurity risks, and mostly just related to phishing emails. And this attack vector of the watering hole attacks is quite unexplored or unknown to many of the employees. So I would highly recommend to adding it to the future training as well. Excuse me. Maintain a list of trusted sources and websites, regularly review their security practices, implement strong web filtering and content control measures to block access. In this case, if you can afford it or are able to do it, I would highly recommend approach of whitelisting rather than blacklisting. It's quite painful to implement at the beginning, but it's a lot more efficient in blocking everything. And it should be designed the way that you pretty much identify sites that your organization or people in your organization need to access for the work. I apologize. And all right, so you need to identify websites and sources that your employees and people in your organization need to use for your work. And then you block everything else, but you have to give them also an option that they have, little pop-up window. This site is blocked because of reasons, but if you think you have business justification to access this site, please enter your comment, and it will go to a team that can evaluate it and eventually whitelist the site. And that way you can build, very robust and working whitelist to mitigate a lot of these attacks and related threats to it. Moving on, web browsers and plugins, and especially the web plugins or add-ons, they are the scourge of web browser security or web browser security in general. So I would also advise the whitelist approach rather than blacklist approach, but any kind of block list will work. The plugins are increasingly more popular as an attack vector. Sandboxing and isolation features in web browsers. I think most of the modern web browsers do offer that, especially Chrome, but allow it if you can, or if you haven't already, to limit the impact of potential exploits, implement network segmentation to isolate critical systems from the rest of the network, the usual network monitoring, intrusion detection, IDS, IPS, regularly scan and assess your own website if you are running any, to make sure that you are not being targeted as a watering hole for any vulnerabilities, and ensure it's securely maintained. Strong access controls and authentication measures for the administration of the website if you are running it. And of course, intelligence sharing, stay informed about the emerging threats, techniques, and so on. All right, and lastly, some general cybersecurity pointers. I'm pretty sure that most of you here already know these. So training the employees, strong access control with multi-factor authentication, regular update, robust firewalls, IDS, IPS, strong email security solution. But on that note, I would like to add that, as we have seen with the Barracuda email secure gateway exploit, the emails are just inherently not secure. So if you are dealing with any kind of sensitive or critical documents, information, or communication within your network, please try to consider, if you haven't already, any alternatives that you can use for more secure way of communication and sharing data and files across the network, because the email is just not secure by the design at the beginning. Regularly backup your data, critical data, and make sure those backups are secured. Regular vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, strong incident response plan, and once again, share the threat intelligence, consume the threat intelligence with peers, industry peers, and cybersecurity professionals, organizations, and also engage cybersecurity professionals for support and guidance. And that's all. Time for questions, if you guys have any.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. There are no questions from what I can see. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, I thank everyone for joining. I hope you have found this informational, and thank you for your time.
Okay, before that, we have come to the end of today's webinar. The next webinar will be on 5th July at 11 a.m. Do feel free to scan the QR code to register for the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.